something bad could happen to them. Jonathan, you agree with that?
Yeah, I would argue that life in prison is considerably worse than the death penalty.
Would you say it's cruel?
Yeah, like solitary confinement, I would say it's very cruel.
But putting them in general population where they could get assaulted, attacked, stabbed,
Yeah.
murdered?
Which a lot of child rapists are usually put in.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep. Bad things typically happen to them in
Yeah,
prison, is that what you're saying?
yeah.
That would be considered cruel, maybe unusual, definitely punishment,
Yeah.
right? Is that better than executing them? Putting them in a place where they could get accosted, assaulted, injured, maimed, whatever for the rest of their lives?
Well, again, the prison system is not perfect, and the prison can. If one thing that we talked about, we haven't really talked about yet, but if you
We
find
can though,
out
if you want to.
that
What
someone-
do you want to talk about, Maggie? Help us out.
The death penalty cannot be reversed. Obviously, if you have, so one thing about putting someone in prison is that they have the opportunity to, you know, from a religious perspective, get right with God, but also if you find out, new DNA evidence, you know, makes someone it seem innocent, then they can be released. And then there's also, you know, prison programs for less violent offenders and people with, you know, good behavior, religious programs, community involvement, training service animals. So obviously the violence in prison is not ideal, but
there are
we don't have a lot
programs
of options.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that. So one of, at my church, one of the church planners we're working with in Chicago, his story is incredible. He committed several crimes, was put in solitary confinement in Chicago, so I imagine that's not awesome. And he was actually under it was against the rules. The guard who was outside his cell actually slipped him a copy of the New Testament, and he became a believer in solitary confinement, and so obviously somehow got out of that. I can't remember the details. And now he is literally a church planter in Chicago, and that's like his testimony, whatever. Kind of taking the religion, I mean, I don't want to take the religious out of that, but how can we maybe, instead of saying, well, you know what, you're a lost cause because you did X terrible thing, how can prisons kind of come alongside people and hope for the best? You know, give them resources, but also understand that people are people, and, you know,
Yeah.
I'm going to go off on a tangent, so go ahead.
Well, I think one of the reasons that we have so many people in prison in the United States is that we have come to sort of view prison as punishment instead of a way to rehabilitate people. And there are some people that, you know, get the life sentence and that we're not going to.
Should it not be a punishment, Maggie?
I think any way you end up doing it, it is a punishment.
Okay.
But I think
Carry
that
on,
we
I'm just
should-
curious. It was odd that you told me prison shouldn't be a punishment.
It is,
Okay.
but I just think that having these like service opportunities or community opportunities makes prison more trying to get, you know, keep these people members of society, even though for the protection of society we need to keep them separate.
I believe if you maybe if you have a counselor there, multiple counselors, but if you had people there to for them to confide in and for them to trust, I feel like people would have a better moral compass in prison, and I feel like that could possibly have a greater impact on how people act to each other. One of my very good friends, she's involved in prison ministry, and she just goes and talks to the prisoners mostly about the Bible, but she also just makes sure that the people that she sees, she's very regular about going. She goes every Sunday, and she makes sure that they know that they're loved, even though they are in such a horrible place in their life. And she just hopes that they will gain some sort of trust with her, so that they can have a greater impact on everyone else in the prison.
Yeah, I feel like prisons right now, as they are not very rehabilitating. So I feel like you could probably, some prisons are implementing classes to get your GED. They don't have it. But I feel like if you had Bible class or something along the lines of that would probably be a good way to make them more socially adapted to, you know. Yeah.
So, do you think the goal of the prison system should be to rehabilitate Because if someone if they've been given the death penalty, we're assuming they're either going to die or at least never get out of prison. So is the goal still to rehabilitate, and do you ever think there is a time when someone cannot be rehabilitated?
I believe it should be to rehabilitate them, just because I believe that everyone deserves a second chance at life. And if the question of whether someone doesn't have the chance of rehabilitation it can vary. I believe that someone with a mental illness can obviously not be rehabilitated like someone that doesn't, but they also are, they don't get punished by the death penalty. It's against the law in some states not to put people with mental illness on the death penalty sentence, which I don't believe that someone with schizophrenia will be different to talk to than someone that just had a very bad experience with someone else.
Can you execute somebody with schizophrenia?
What?
Can you execute somebody with schizophrenia?
No.
Okay.
So what's the alternative? Sorry, Matt, you go.
I just want to make one correction.
Yeah,
You aren't allowed to execute juveniles or people with intellectual disabilities, which is not the case with mental illness. So people have been lobbying for people with mental illness to be exempt from the death penalty, but currently they are not. It's just people with intellectual disabilities or quote mental retardation.
People who perhaps didn't know what they were doing.
Correct.
How does race play into the death penalty?
Basically, you are more likely to be executed if if you're a black defendant, white victim. That is, I think it says, hold on. Yeah, the odds of receiving the death penalty rose 3.5 times among those defendants whose victims were white, based on a study in 2011.
So do you know if the reverse is also, like you have a decreased likelihood to be executed if you're a white offender and the victim is a minority?
Yes, there is.
It said that there was 290 persons executed for interracial murders. 290 were the black defendants that killed a white victim, and then there was 21 white defendants that killed a white victim.
Does that tell you anything about how we enforce the death penalty or our society generally?
It's very racially biased. It says jurors in Washington state are 3 times more likely to recommend a death sentence for a black defendant than a white defendant in a similar case.
Are all those numbers equal though? Or the number of defendants of each race, are those equal? So therefore the numbers are skewed?
Well, that's just more likely per individual case. So the
Okay.
percentage is higher, more likely to recommend someone for the death penalty if they are black than if they're white. The death row prisoners by race at the moment is 40% black, 40% white. With, and then the other percent being Hispanic or
Let me shift gears just a little bit, guys. Are you familiar with the term enemy combatant? You know what an enemy combatant is? Okay, if somebody's picked up in Afghanistan fighting for the Taliban, right, and they're incarcerated, typically they're called an enemy combatant. They were apprehended on the field of battle. They have been put into some military judicial system. Typically Guantanamo Bay is one you've probably heard about a lot. Oftentimes these enemy combatants, if they're found guilty in a military court, could be sentenced to the death penalty. We feel like that holds the same basis as our civil enforcement of the death penalty here in the United States. Can we kill enemy combatants, but we can't kill people with the death penalty in our court system in the U.S.? How do we feel about that? Individually, here's your feeling.
Yeah. I'm definitely less familiar with that than with the civil cases, but no, I don't think we should be a country that kills people who are neutralized and no longer a threat.
Okay. Jonathan?
Yeah, like Maggie said, not as informed on that, but I would say we shouldn't kill them if they're neutralized.
So if I capture somebody on the battlefield and we put them through the military judicial system, we shouldn't kill them in the area either.
No. I would
Okay.
say.
I'm not very familiar with that either. I don't believe that we should kill them, just because they are very they're not, they're in their own like separate environment than like civil cases.
Okay.
And I believe that it should stay the same.
So if I capture you on the battlefield, enemy combatants, there's also a push to bring those people into the U.S. court system, to not leave them in Guantanamo Bay, to bring them to New York or Kansas, Leavenworth, wherever, try them, and then put them into our prison systems. Would we be in favor of that if we're not executing them?
I would be, yeah.
Would you put them on the death row in the United States?
Could, or you could sentence them to life in prison if it's a state that doesn't have the death penalty.
I mean, if it's someone who's gonna be dangerous, then I think they should go to prison, but I don't think we should execute them.
Okay, so we should put them in our prison system here. What have we talked about the population of our prison system currently? Overcrowded. Do you think that would add to that, or that would take away from
It
it?
definitely has to.
Okay, so we have now a logistical problem as well, correct?
Well, that goes back to the problem with our prison system in general, but, because you're talking about someone who, like, you're talking about that's someone who's actually dangerous versus someone who's a drug offender, so, if I was gonna take people out of prison, it would be the nonviolent drug offenders, not the.
So let's talk more specifically about that military, whatever that word was.
Enemy combatant.
Sure.
Yep.
So if we're talking about, let's talk about 9/11,
Words are hard.
for example. Were you guys alive then? Okay, I didn't think so. Yeah, I remember, yeah.
I feel old.
Yeah, so 9/11 was obviously a very terrible thing that happened, and the people who actually committed that crime died while committing it. However, if they were to live somehow, or the people who were to, if we found out who, which we did, kind of gave those orders, is that like an offense grievous enough to?
So there's a good case in point. The 20th hijacker actually did not participate in the event. Zacharias Moussaoui, I believe is his name. He was captured, incarcerated. He's in, I believe, in Kansas and Leavenworth. Currently serving, I don't really know his sentence, but is your question,
Yeah.
what should happen to him?
Yeah, what should happen to that guy? I
He
didn't
was
even know
going
he
to fly the
existed.
plane into the building.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I'm gonna be honest, they're prisoners, so I think I would not personally have some sort of moral objection just initially to taking them out back and beating them to death with a stick, but I don't think that, no, listen, but I don't think that you can say, I don't think that the state should act with the mentality of, my emotions.
Okay,
or
sure.
That's fair.
So we're not leading with that.
Right.
I see.
I don't think that the state should have this mob mentality or the malice of a cold-blooded killer. Like, I just don't think, even though there are certain things, I mean, obviously, if you're saying, okay, this person is a murderer, is a rapist, is whatever,
Right.
I'm not saying that I have sympathy or that I want, but I just don't think that in general we should, I don't think in general we should have the death penalty. I'm not
Sure.
saying that in every single case I would say, oh yeah, that person doesn't deserve to,
Sure.
Yeah. I'm just about the exact same with Maggie. I believe that some people more like, if you're a terrorist, then obviously you deserve to die.
Right.
I don't believe that it is our, judge, we're not supposed to judge the case. I believe that it's mostly God's point to judge them at that point, but we just don't beat them up with a stick and
it'd be cathartic.
Yeah, God has other punishment methods I've read about before. I think he'll take care of it. He's creative. So, a question I have, kind of following up on this, is it seems to me like our sense of morality with killing tends to shift depending on circumstances. For example, enemy combatant, right? We read recently about U.S. military goes in, some sort of special forces unit and kills al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, right? No court sentenced him to die, but some dudes with guns went in and killed him, along with several other people there, right? But if we capture people in that same compound who even were wielding weapons, and we could have killed lawfully, the military units that were there could have killed them, they captured them, and now all of a sudden our sense of morality shifts and it's wrong to kill that person. Well, we could have killed him on the ground at that time. And I would say it's similar with self-defense, right? If somebody breaks into my home with a weapon, they point a gun at me, I'm justified under Kentucky law to shoot and kill them. Self-defense, right? And we would say morally, I got no problem with that. But if he's captured, arrested by the state, and put in a prison, we now have a moral problem to execute that same person when we don't have a moral problem for me to kill him if he's in my house. Is it because when emotion is high, we're okay to kill? Or, it just seems to me like our morality can shift based on the circumstances. Killing's not wrong all the time, so why is it wrong in this context?
When you're talking about someone who is actively dangerous, who is in your house and pointing a gun at your face, that's different than this person in a prison cell who cannot escape and cannot, hurt the public in this prison. I think it's different. You're talking about neutralize someone who is not actively a threat. I think there's a difference as whether you can kill them versus in self-defense. I need to kill this person or they're going to hurt somebody else.
So if you break into my house and I'm holding a gun to you, as long as I don't pull the trigger, you got off lucky, now you get to go hang out in prison for a while.
You call that lucky, yeah.
So,
Good.
several of you mentioned innocence in your stances on whether or not the death penalty is cool or not. Which makes me feel like now that you're flipping, you have some stuff to say about that. So, is there like a trend of innocent people getting executed?
So,
Because that's horrifying.
yeah. So since 1973, more than 160 people have been released from death row in the United States with evidence of their innocence. From 1973 to 1999, there was an average of 3 exonerations per year. From 2000 to 2011, there was an average of 5 exonerations per year.
Yeah, so just as DNA evidence is becoming more prevalent, more accurate, they're going back and looking at these cases and realizing that they didn't have enough evidence to convict this person in the first place. So yeah, there's definitely people who were executed who, either were innocent or were didn't deserve the death penalty. You've got like Rodney Reed in Texas this week. He was convicted of a 1996 rape and murder and was scheduled to be executed on November 20th. And actually, I think it was just a few days ago that the parole board unanimously recommended a 120-day reprieve because people were saying that the murder weapon, which was a belt, actually was never DNA tested. And since he's maintained his innocence, they have decided to go back and look at that because.
Just out of curiosity, how many people on death row do you think maintain their innocence? Have you ever seen Shawshank Redemption? Yeah, we're all innocent, right? Yeah, I'm just. I always love it when people say, "Oh, well, he maintained his innocence." Of course, he maintained his innocence. He's on death row. What's in his best interest? I didn't do it. I wasn't guilty. I'm not saying they were or not. I'm just saying. Now, if we're pointing out the number of cases that have come back on, there's some new evidence and we can change this. How many cases do we not hear about in the news where the person was completely guilty, but yet we point to the 1 or 2 cases a year where somebody comes back and there was some evidence that could overturn, or maybe they didn't do it thoroughly enough, or maybe the police didn't investigate something enough. But how many other cases are there on the backside of that never made it to the news, where the person was very guilty or they had very incriminating evidence, but we don't know about it because it didn't make CNN or.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, if there's only 5 exonerations per year, there are lots of people who they are not exonerated.
So the exception, not the rule, Maggie?
Exception, not the rule. But
Okay.
the idea of the state having the power to kill someone who, didn't do anything wrong or didn't do enough wrong to warrant it rubs me the wrong way.
Okay. Let's flip this a little bit more, guys. Let's talk about somebody like Jeffrey Epstein, okay? Really bad dude. Really, really bad dude. Regardless of what his sentence would have been, he was looking at a really, really bad sentence, correct? What if somebody like Jeffrey Epstein, again, we'll take him out of the current situation that he finds himself in, which is no situation. What if he said, listen, I can't handle living in prison for the rest of my life. I've done some bad, or at least I've been accused of doing some bad things. Bad things are gonna happen to me when I get to prison. I would like to be executed. Should he have the ability to ask for that in that situation? We've said the state can't mandate, shouldn't, from your point of view, be able to mandate execution. Should a prisoner be able to ask for execution?
I would say no. That's like rewarding bad behavior almost,
Is it?
I would
Being
say
hung
so.
or shot or electrocuted, set on fire, Maggie told me?
Well, I still believe that the death penalty is an easier sentence than life in prison.
So we shouldn't be able to let them ask for execution because that gives them the easy way out? Courtney, do you agree with that?
To a certain extent, yes, but also if they find themselves in such a bad situation in prison
Mhm.
where they are getting tortured, I believe that they should be able to talk to a lawyer and see if they can get something worked out to where they don't have to be in a cruel and unusual punishment.
It saves us money, right? If they want to go out that way. We've removed the issue that you guys had with the state mandating it, right? We've reduced the cost, the expense, because now they're not going through appeals processes and all of the, assuming it doesn't flip the